Hello, friends. It's been quite a while since I've read any of my book, which came out in the 1990s. I almost said 1890s. I think it came out in 1997 or 8. Anyway, um, chapter 4 is, we've got as far as chapter 4, which I've called, or at the time I called the Wilderness Years, 1884 to 1894, SATOW'S Wilderness Years. That was not a popular title for a chapter with certain friends who were academics at the time, particularly people who felt that Siam, Thailand was more important than perhaps I did in Sato's career. At any rate, that's what I called it, for better or worse. I suppose it has a Churchillian ring to it as well, which perhaps is unnecessary. Okay, well, anyway, here we go. I'm going to read chapter 4 of the Diaries and Letters of Sir Ernest Mason Sato, 1843 to 1929, which was my book published in 1990s. Okay, The Wilderness Years, 1884 to 1894. Summary. In 1884, Sato was appointed Consul General in Bangkok, a recognized halfway house within the Foreign Office for elevation into the diplomatic service from the consular service. I don't mean Bangkok was a recognized halfway house, I mean Consul General as a rank. He was in due course promoted to the rank of minister in the former early in 1885, a most unusual distinction. But Siam was hot, dirty, and sticky, and his health suffered to the point of breakdown. He visited Japan twice from Bangkok. After a long home leave, he became minister at Montevideo in 1888, an earthly paradise in which he found nothing to do, according to his friend, the diplomatic historian Temperley, in the Dictionary of National Biography. The Uruguay posting was, however, intended by the Foreign Office as a chance to recover his spirits and health. When Sato was transferred to the more challenging arena of Morocco as envoy extraordinary and minister plenipotentiary in 1893, he showed great skill in negotiating with the Sultan Mulai Hassan, 1857 to 1894, and visited his successor Abdul Aziz at Fez in 1894. In June 1895, he was awarded the KCMG, Knight Commander of the Order of St. Michael and St. George, in recognition of his efforts, and was at last appointed Minister Plenipotentiary at Tokyo. For Sato's letters to F.V. Dickens about Japan, see pages 182 to 189. Okay. So Siam, March 1884 to April 1887. At the beginning of 1884, Sato was still on leave in England. He had just turned 40 and had spent almost all of his career until that time in Japan. He had achieved his objective of mastering the Japanese language and had a deeper understanding of Japanese culture than almost all other Europeans at the time, with the possible exception of Aston and Chamberlain. Yet at the end of 1883, he had agreed to apply for the post of Agent and Consul General in Bangkok, to be raised to Minister Resident in early 1885, on the understanding that it was only by serving outside Japan for a time that he would be allowed to return as minister. He was appointed and left for Bangkok on the 25th of January 1884. Siam at this time was subject to increasing Western influence, mainly from the French and British. Siam played off the powers skillfully against each other. The Siamese rulers granted concessions as well as political relations to European countries. In 1867, Siam relinquished its claim on Cambodia to France. During the reign of King Chulalongkorn, 1868 to 1910, policy of Western internal reform was implemented. Sato wrote in his diary for 17th of June, 1884, that he found the king able, intelligent, and interested in improving the welfare and maintaining the independence of his country. Yet the political intrigues centering on the regent and his supporters prevented him from introducing the modernizing reforms he would have liked. The king, keenly aware of how the balance of power in East and Southeast Asia would affect Siam, often questioned Sato as to policy. The French were pressing from Tonking on the eastern border, and in September 1885, Sato urged that a close alliance with Britain was the best way to thwart the French designs. However, an understanding with Britain was hampered by the pressure on Siam from the British Colonial Office and the Singapore government to accept the territorial claims of the Malay states. In addition, India annexed Upper Burma in 1886, complicating the unsettled northern border with the Shan states. Although Britain recognized the claim of the deposed King of Burma, Satow assured the foreign minister that Britain desired Siam's internal tranquility and would recognize the rights of Siam. The Siamese, like the Japanese, wished to get rid of extraterritoriality as provided in the treaties. To accomplish this, they had to reform the legal system. Satow, seeking to help them, made many proposals for judicial reform, but few were accepted. Real reform was prevented by the old officials who had bought their posts. So corruption. Initially, Satow regarded his new posting as a kind of exile, and in the 3 years he spent in Siam, he returned to Japan twice for rest and recuperation. A few days after his arrival, he wrote that his student days were over at last. He now had an apparently promising future in the higher echelons of the Foreign Office and was to be the senior official in all subsequent postings. He wrote, "No one has a right to be as happy as I used to be when I had no responsibilities and was still a boy in everything but years." During his first month, Satow was busy moving into his new house. In a letter to one of his sisters, he wrote that the house was a huge 3-storied brick building surrounded on each story by a veranda. It stood 40 yards back from the river with a garden in front of it. Satow was soon joined by his Japanese servant, Honma Saburo, and his piano arrived safely. In addition, he acquired a dog to cheer my loneliness, a white and tan fox terrier of very good breed. What more can a man want to make him comfortable? Yet it was soon clear that Satow was missing Japan. In a letter to Frederick Victor Dickens, dated 20th of March 1884, he wrote of Japan, "I never think of that country without the liveliest feelings of regret. One was so happy there, in spite of the distance from England, and the travelling in the interior was delightful. Sometimes I think I was a great fool to leave it simply for promotion." He had, of course, left his family in Japan also. He began to write the first portion of his Japan memoirs, later to be called A Diplomat in Japan. As the weeks passed, he started to suffer from the oppressive heat and uncongenial surroundings. Dr. Nigel Brayley has suggested that Satow did not much like Siam or the Siamese, although his first impression had been that they were gentle. Rather than dislike for the Siamese, I believe Satow must have felt frustration, as he stated that the country either did not seem to make any real progress, or the rate of progress was so slow that even long-term residents could not detect it. He also wished that the Siamese the Thai people, would show some of the patriotic spirit he had found in the Japanese people. Again, he wrote, "There are so many abuses of every kind to fight against that my soul is weary. Injustice and corruption in the native courts, endless delays, equivocation and falseness on the part of the officials with whom one has to deal with are a few of the evils." On his promotion to minister, which involved his transfer from the consular to the diplomatic service, a major step up, he wrote with gratitude on the 15th of April 1885 to Sir Philip Currie, the assistant under-secretary to whom he reported directly at the Foreign Office. Satow expressed his great pleasure, though he modestly questioned whether he deserved the promotion. He added that the King of Siam had been greatly delighted, as his private secretary had often mentioned that they hoped to have a minister resident. They think it amounts to according them a higher status, and the public will no doubt suppose that Her Majesty's government is taking an increased interest in the welfare of Siam. Yet in a letter to Dickens, dated 26th of June 1885, he wrote of his wish to retire early, adding, "The climate does not suit me, and the place is odious." Letters to the Astons from Bangkok, March 1884 to May 1885. Several letters to W.G. Aston and his wife from Satow's time in Bangkok are contained in the Satow papers. The first one is dated 21st of March 1884, when Satow had only just arrived. At this point, he seems to have been in quite good spirits and enjoying the novelty of a change of location, although he did miss Japan. "This is not such a bad place, though there is much that makes me regret Japan. The town lies on the river in the midst of a wide delta chiefly cultivated as paddy fields. The public buildings are fine and even picturesque, rather more so than in Japan, owing to the great number of sharp spires in the Buddhist temples, but the houses of the inhabitants are squalid and dirty. That is partly due to the difficulty of being neat and tidy in a hot country. One chiefly goes about in a sort of gondola, but there are a few roads, and I've taken my first ride today. We also have tennis in the agency compound. The house is not altogether bad, though quite destitute of ornament, and I have plenty of room. I like the work pretty well, as a change from Japanese newspapers and interpreting, but I'm very sorry not to be in at the revision of the treaties. And I like the Plunkett so much that it is a real grief to me not to be in Tokyo during their reign. I rather hope that you will be at headquarters until you go to Korea, which is as certain as anything not actually announced can be. What a fine lot of promotion there will now be for the Japan service. SATOW'S regret that he was not involved in revision of the unequal treaties was justified. He had already proved himself to be good at that kind of work, which from 1880 to 1894 was the major work of the British legation in Japan. In SATOW'S absence, John Harrington Gubbins, 1852 to 1929, became the legation's chief expert under Sir Francis Plunkett, who succeeded Parkes as minister. Gubbins' life and work, including his relationship with Sato, of which more later, are described in detail in the second volume of Britain and Japan Biographical Portraits, published in 1997. On the 27th of June 1884, Sato wrote again to Aston, now provisionally appointed Consul General in Korea. He was very annoyed to discover that the title page he had left for the list of Korean geographical names had not been used, and that his name had been attached as the sole author. Both Aston and Chamberlain had contributed to the publication, and there had been an agreement that the work should appear anonymously. He had pointed this out in a separate letter to Plunkett, acknowledging receipt of some offprints. He continued, I hope you find Korea less inviting a residence than the reports of J.C. Hall and Henry Bonar, the British consular officials, represent it to be. The work must be very interesting, and you have a teachable people to deal with. This last comment indicates Sato's dissatisfaction with the Siamese, who were apparently not teachable. By the following year, Willis had joined Sato. He had left Japan for good in 1877, although he had briefly returned in 1881 to 2, see Chapter 3. Sato wrote about their bachelor lifestyle in Bangkok to Mrs. Aston in Seoul on the 8th of May 1885. The letter is chatty in parts, but pulls no punches in criticizing Siamese or Thai culture. Willis lives much with me. There is a vacant house in the compound owing to the absence of the vice-consul in England, and he occupies it instead of trying to find a house outside. We lunch, dine, take 5 o'clock tea and a bottle of Rossbach, which is German mineral water, at 10 regularly every day. It is such a comfort to have his society, and he's quite the old Willis of days that your husband will remember, between 1864 and 1869, full of stories, argument, and the most sympathizing doctor you could have in the world. I tell him that he is old Sam Johnson come back to the earth. He studies the Siamese language with great diligence and has a large clientele of patients who give a great deal of trouble and don't pay. Society is more numerous than with you at Seoul, but gives little satisfaction. One is obliged to see and dine a lot of folks who are entirely uninteresting. The feeling is no doubt mutual, but on Wednesdays at least I have a few musical people, and on Fridays a small tennis party. To the latter I wanted to invite ladies, but there are none who can play, so it had to be given up. The other form of enjoyment is driving. There are some good roads, and after much difficulty I have succeeded in getting a couple of ponies who go and look extremely well in brown harness with brass fixings. Also I possess a horse who is rather difficult to mount. Eating and drinking are very bad here, and the cooks are worse. Luckily, one has but little appetite. We catch the rainwater that drips from the caves, and so satisfy our thirst. Don't picture us as standing with gaping mouths every time it rains, and going about with black parched throats in the intervals. We store the water in big terracotta jars from which it imbibes a slight flavour that we, always Willis and I, we can do nothing alone, think is derived from saltpetre in the clay. Curry forms the staple article of diet. We are, however, not badly off for fruit, and some of the mangoes are delicious, but only some. The others are fit for pigs. Durian is much belauded by those who have got over their disgust, but I cannot forget that I was born in a civilized Christian country, and look on such men with pity. If I ever find myself in danger of overcoming this righteous prejudice, I shall apply for sick leave. Durian is indeed a foul-smelling fruit, if palatable, but the terms with which Sato rejects the fruit tell us something of the superior viewpoint from which he looked down on the uncivilized and unchristian Siam. He continued, round Bangkok, the country is flat and paddy-fieldy, but on the coast of the Gulf there are many places that could be made very pleasant by a small expenditure on building houses. In one way, it reminds me of Niigata, a very nice place to go away from. The natives are not pleasant, and one has as few of them as possible for servants. As a rule, they are thieves, and the truth is not in them. He'd already had some trouble with Japanese servants in his previous posting. Sato's comments on Siamese officials were not flattering. In the same letter, he described them as the correlatives of the ambassador in the famous definition. The definition he referred to was probably the dictum variously attributed to King James I and the scholar-diplomat Sir Henry Wotton, 1568 to 1639, quoted by Alcock in his Capital of the Tycoon, that the diplomatic corps consisted of men of quality sent abroad to lie for the benefit of their country. Diplomat in Siam, December 1885 to March 1886. During his time in Siam, Sato undertook various travels in the interior. He described the most important one in a manuscript originally entitled Diary of a Journey from Bangkok to Chiang Mai and Back, 1885 to 1886, or alternatively, Travels in Siam. Dr. Nigel Brayley, in the introduction to his 1994 edition of A Diplomat in Siam, a title chosen by Brayley to put it on a par with Sato's Japan memoirs, suggests that it was this journey which damaged his health seriously, if temporarily. It can be held directly responsible for the abbreviation of Sato's tenure in Siam. Yet Brayley also states that the journey did also call into question the fundamental principles which he had been attempting to apply as minister there. It seems that increasingly Sato took an anti-imperialist stance in marked contrast to his masters in England. He did what he could to diminish extraterritoriality and tried to help Siam regain its sovereignty over British subjects in the country. Visits to Japan from Siam, October 1884, June to August 1886. So 2 visits to Japan. 1. October 1884. In October 1884, Sato was in Japan for about a month. During this period, he bought a house for his common-law wife, Takeda Kane, and their 2 young sons at Fujimicho 4-chome, now part of Chiyoda Ward in the center of Tokyo. A memorial stone behind Hosei University Library marks the spot where it stood. The first ever diary reference to the sons, Eitaro and Hisakichi, was made in Romanized Japanese on the 6th of October. Hirugo kodomo o mini ittara, futari tomo souken de otonashikute mezurashi. Eitaro wa issakunen yori kakubetsu sei ga nobinai chie ga tsuita. Hisakichi iro shiroku waga ototo Theodore ni yoku nitari. Translation: in the afternoon I went to see the children. Both were healthy, gentle and charming. Eitaro hasn't grown much in height since the year before last, but he has become wiser. Hisakichi is of fair complexion and closely resembles my younger brother Theodore. On the 7th of November, Sato attended a garden party at the palace. He wrote unkindly of the emperor. The Mikado looked more idiotic than ever and could only mumble some inarticulate words which meant nothing. He is horribly ugly. However, he was more complimentary about little Takehito, who looked nice. This was not the future Taisho emperor, who was called Yoshihito, but presumably Prince Arisugawa Takehito. Sato also paid for the Fujimicho house on this day. Sato read a paper before the Asiatic Society of Japan entitled Notes on the Intercourse between Japan and Siam in the 17th Century on 19th of November. The meeting was held in the house of Reverend James Summers, 1828 to 1891, see Chapter 1, who was by then editor of the Transactions. The second visit, June to August 1886, second visit to Japan. In 1886, Sato went on leave again in Japan to convalesce. His diary records that he travelled by way of Hong Kong and reached Nagasaki on the 23rd of June. 4 days later, he reached Yokohama. On the 29th of June, he noted in his diary that he began to read the treaty revision papers. See that Sir Francis Plunkett has got Foreign Office permission to work independently of the other powers if necessary. I see it all now. I never believed the Foreign Office would do it. Conference has gone back to Inoue Kaoru's propositions of 1882. Frenchmen much disgusted at the turn things have taken. Rest of the cabinet are supposed not to be very friendly. Conference is now adjourned till October in order that the home governments may have their say. Suppose they all agree, then the Japanese have to complete their codes and present them in an authorized English version to the powers within 2 years of the ratification. If that is done, the Japanese will throw open the country with jurisdiction over foreigners outside treaty limits, and after 3 years more, they will have jurisdiction in the settlements. So it all turns on their being ready with their codes, criminal and civil codes, I think. On the 2nd of July, Sato visited his old friend, Ito Hirobumi. They talked a lot about Siam and a little about treaty revision and railways. Sato thought Ito looked old and worn. He is now Minister-President of the Council and has immense power. The others are dwarfs. I do not quite understand how he should have so much preponderance. On 3rd of July, Sato called on the Tosa politician Goto Shojiro, 1838 to 1897, who had formed the Gyuto Party in 1881, with Sir Richard Plunkett, British Minister in Japan, 1884 to 1887, and Parkes' successor. Plunkett had worked under Parkes and been sent by him to Korea in 1875. On the 7th of July, Sato visited Mutsumune Mitsu, 1844 to 1897, later Foreign Minister from 1892 to 1896, and the man responsible for negotiating the abolition of the unequal treaties through the Anglo-Japanese Commercial Treaty of 1894. Mutsu said much the same things as Goto, but more moderately. He knows the chief points of treaty revision, but is troubled about the appointment of judges, professes himself very English in tendency, does not think there will be any great influx of foreigners or foreign capital, does not wish the transition period to be too long. On the 9th of July, Sato called on Okuma Shigenobu, 1838 to 1922. Okuma had recently, in 1882, founded the Tokyo Senmon Gakko, which was renamed Waseda University in 1902. He was friendly. School is not quite so flourishing as might be, owing to competition of state-supported schools, which give greater advantages. Country very poor, owing to contraction of the currency, no opening for investment in commerce, so people put it in government bonds, etc. Hollowness of government credit, but worst of all, the police system must be changed from top to bottom. Brutality of police officers chosen from Shijoku, the descendants of samurai, who treat lower classes as being of another race. Ito has to shut his eyes to a great deal that goes on which he is powerless to remedy. On the 10th of July, there was a prize-giving ceremony at the newly renamed Imperial University, now Tokyo University, which had been established through the unification of 2 earlier schools in 1877. Ito read an address that was much applauded. He has an impressive delivery, but unluckily his appearance not noble. Was introduced to Mishima Michitsune, the prefect of police, who looks a brute and has the reputation of being one. On the 13th of July, Sato noted that he went to Yokohama for lunch. Called afterwards on the Hepburns. He is 72 and she 68, has nearly finished stereotyping 3rd edition of his dictionary, had it out with J.C. Hall about his article in Herald, the Japan Herald, on Chamberlain's grammar, in which he attacked me also in an unprovoked way. His explanation is that he was offended at a passage in one of my recent letters to him, warning him off the field of Japanese scholarship, as he expresses it. I said that he had used an unfair weapon and that he knew it was not open to me. Left him without giving my hand. He is an ass to purposely make enemies of those who would have been his friends. On the 17th of July, Sato set out for Hakone. He was there and at Nikko for about a month. On the 29th of July, Sato wrote to AGS Hawes, Albert George Sidney Hawes, and F.V. Dickens, Frederick Victor Dickens, positively that they must give up the idea of 3rd edition of Handbook in Europe on account of changes. 302 copies still unsold, will take till midsummer 1888. Must hand it over to someone in Japan to do. On 26th of August, back in Tokyo, Sato went to see Goto Shojiro by appointment. They discussed treaty revision. Goto said that many Japanese were anxious about allowing foreigners to reside in the interior on equal terms with themselves. There used to be a proverb that if 2 samurai lived in a village, they would ruin it. He thought that when the details of the proposed treaty came to be discussed, difficulties would arise. The Japanese people were not glad to receive the blessings of political freedom on account of foreigners. Sato responded that the foreign representatives were trying to normalize relations between Japan and the rest of the world. Nobody was suggesting that extraterritorial jurisdiction should be suddenly and completely abandoned. On the contrary, it was gradually to be phased out, and this was an opportunity which Japan should not pass up. Japan was the first of the countries where extraterritoriality had prevailed to find a way out of that condition, and this sort of preeminence should not be lightly abandoned. But he did not seem to be quite convinced. The conversation turned to the 1890 Parliament. Sato urged Goto not to abandon his post as Liberal leader, that's the leader of the Jiuto or Liberal Party. Goto, Okuma, and Mutsu should enter Parliament in order to express their views in a constitutional manner. He expressed the hope that I should come back to Japan as envoy, and said that my knowledge of the history of the last 20 years and of the language made it much easier for him to consult me than an envoy to whom he must speak through an interpreter. I replied that nothing would please me better. I had from the first taken a great interest in Japan, and I believed I should be able to serve her during the difficult years which would ensue on the new treaties coming into force, by smoothing over the friction that would be likely to occur on the introduction of new machinery. Sato noted that hereafter in parentheses, I really think they, meaning the Foreign Office, could not do better than send me to Japan as Plunkett's successor. On 9th of March 1907, Sato recorded that he owed his start in Bangkok to Sir Francis Plunkett, who died that year. On the 5th of September, Sato was again in Hong Kong on his way back to Siam. He spoke with a missionary of the London Missionary Society named Sadler. The Protestant missionaries in China find the need of a friend in diplomacy who would help them now and then in their troubles and be sympathetic. Sadler asked for help, but Sato said, I feared I could be of little use being far off, and that it might be a delicate matter to interfere with matters that came properly under the cognizance of the envoy at Peking. But if I could, I would help them as an impartial friend. Sato returned to Siam on the 1st of October 1886 by way of Singapore. Sato leaves Siam. Just before leaving Siam, Sato wrote again to Aston on the 29th of January 1887. By this time, things had definitely taken a turn for the worse. His health was deteriorating in the unforgiving heat of Siam. He suffered attacks of malarial fever, and he had already written to ask for leave, hinting privately that he would like to be transferred to another post. To Aston, he wrote, I've had a good deal of annoyance lately from a lawyer and a doctor in the Siamese service, who have abused me variously in connection with the regulation for the registration of British subjects modelled upon the system in force in China and Japan. Here it is a rather a different question, as the English-born are comparatively few, but we have many thousands of Asiatics who are constantly getting into trouble with the Siamese authorities up country, and it is really important to get them on our books. The lawyer in particular distinguishes himself by maintaining that he is a Siamese subject, and I shall have a great deal of trouble bringing him to book. The doctor to whom Sato refers here was Dr. Peter Gowan, whom Willis had displaced as legation physician. The lawyer was E.B. Mitchell, Michell, legal advisor to the Siamese prince Thewawong Waropakan, Dewawongse Varapoka, who had become Siam's foreign minister in 1885. What Sato did, following the custom in Japan and China, was to require all British subjects to pay a fee to be registered as such at the British legation. Sato's intention was to prevent false British passports from being used for smuggling. Unfortunately, the dispute soured Sato's relations with Prince Thewawong. While returning to England with Thewawong in May 1887 for Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee, Sato became convinced that the prince had known about the plans of the petitioners who had been giving him such trouble, causing his health to deteriorate almost to the point of breakdown. Although he was a 6-footer, his weight dropped to under 10 stone. There were some difficult interviews at the Foreign Office in July 1887, which also may have done Sato's reputation harm in the eyes of Lord Salisbury, who apparently felt that he should not return to Siam. Sato himself did not hope to go back, any more than the Siamese wished him to return. Leave in England and Europe, June 1887, October 1888 to October 1888. The long period of leave in England and Europe from June 1887 until October 1888, when he finally was offered a post in Uruguay, can fairly be described as the low point of Sato's career. On the 15th of June 1887, Sato reached Dover at about 9 a.m. There he found E.H. French of the Siam legation waiting to escort Prince Thewawong, the half-brother of King Chulalongkorn, who had become foreign minister in 1885. There was a military reception, the Siamese national anthem was played, and an address was delivered by the mayor. Later in the day, Sato met his mother, Sister Agneta, and Sister Mary, and her daughter Kathy at Chislehurst Station. On the 5th of July, Sato went by train to see Mitford at Batsford Park, Morton in Marsh, Gloucestershire, and stayed there till the 9th. On the 9th of July, he went on to Monmouth by way of Worcester and Hereford. There he met Willis and went to his farm. On the 12th of July, he returned to London by way of Chepstow, and on August the 10th, he went with his sister Agneta to Manchester to see oil paintings. On the 26th of August, Sato returned to London. He went to the Foreign Office, where Assistant Under Secretary Francis Barty told him that E.H. French, an interpreter of the Siamese language and a consular official, was not going back to Siam. This was most regrettable, Sato felt. I express my dissatisfaction pretty strongly with the way in which the Siam service is losing its men from the upper ranks and being filled up with students whose knowledge is useless for 3 or 4 years after their appointment. On 30th of August, Sato went to the Bodleian Library in Oxford and was admitted to read. On the 14th of September, Sato learned that E.H. French was to be sent back to Siam after all, a small victory for Sato. On the 18th of September, he departed for Bern, Switzerland, by 11 o'clock train from Charing Cross Station with Saburo, his servant. On the 1st of October, Sato reached Bonn at 9:20 a.m. and found his friend Johann Justus Rhein on the platform. Rhein was a professor of geography at Bonn University from 1883 to 1910. He had lived in Japan, collected fossils in Shiramine, Ishikawa Prefecture in 1874, and had contributed to the Handbook for Travellers in Central and Northern Japan, 1881, edited by Sato and Lieutenant A.G.S. Hawes, mentioned in Chapter 3. He was also the author of 2 major tomes on Japan, Travel and Researches, first published in 1884, and The Industries of Japan, 1889. Sato had visited him when studying at Marburg in the summer of 1876. On the 17th of November 1887, Sato was finally called to the bar at the Queen's Bench. He had taken the bar exams at Lincoln's Inn in October 1883, passing in first place. Sato is confirmed Anglican, October 1888. The most important event of this period of leave marked a turning point in Sato's inner life. For some time he had been dissatisfied with the materialistic philosophy of Herbert Spencer, which had first attracted him as a young, lapsed nonconformist at University College in London. Then in the winter of 1887-8, he followed up studies of the Jesuit movement begun in Japan, paying visits to Italy, Spain, and Portugal between the middle of January and the end of April 1888. In different libraries, he unearthed books issued by the Jesuit press in Japan and wrote a complete account in a beautiful monograph, The Jesuit Mission Press in Japan, published in 1889. It was also soon afterwards, perhaps in the Bodleian Library at Oxford, that he experienced a spiritual conversion to Christianity. Bernard Allen suggests that it was while reading a Latin edition of Thomas à Kempis's Imitation of Christ. The first words of this were, Qui sequiter me non ambrulat in tenebris sed habebit lumen vitae. He that followeth me walketh not in darkness, but shall have the light of life. Sato was confirmed on the 29th of October 1888 at St. Paul's Cathedral by the Bishop of London. Allen comments that the religion became the centre of Sato's life from that time on. To the outward eye, he may not have shown much noticeable change, but to those who knew him, his character was marked by a depth and strength which it had not known before. And I will stop there, although we still have Uruguay and Morocco to go in this chapter. So thank you very much, and see you again soon.